Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of Generation to Generation, Bridging the Gap with Rex
and Eva.
And we are going to have
We are so excited.
Yes,
there you go.
are.
We're so excited.
We are so excited.
Anyway.
Anyway, we're in a hurry today because we have all of about 19 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm, 19.
We're moving from one thing to the next. Moving fast. So, we wanted to follow up and this particular episode could go so many different directions. And actually, it's kind of energized me to take a look at some historical things that I really haven't looked at in a while, haven't thought about. But in last week's episode, in talking about what in creating, I ask you to actually,
I'm sorry, guys. I've been busy and sleep deprived. I'm getting to changing the title of it, like he has asked me to. But we'll get there. The new title is going to be "The God in Our Image" or "Creating God in Our Image."
Yeah,
something like that. And so it'll be fixed.
It'll be fixed. But that's why I had to pause for a minute. What did we name that episode?
God you create versus the God who is.
Yeah, so we're going to rename it. But
Anyway.
the whole premise is, and pastors have been preaching messages on this for years, that, we tend to create God in our image.
Mm-hmm.
If there are things in the Bible that we really don't agree with or we don't like, we try to do the human thing of explaining them away. And so we create God in our image. For instance, God would never be a God that sends someone to hell because he is a loving God. And so therefore, how could he possibly send someone to hell? Well, we create what I think most psychologists would call a construct. And we just say, well, we try to reason it, we try to rationalize it, and I think we put God's character in a box when we try to do that.
We try and understand God when he was never meant for something to be something we could understand. We only understand him as much as he allows us to, but there's always going to be parts that we don't understand because he's so big and so omnipresent, and so.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the idea last week. And so it came, what?
Oh, that got me thinking. So you know how I shamelessly plug the books I read for school?
Yeah.
Well, one of the characters in Brothers Karamazov, Ivan, he denies God's existence by saying, I only believe in things that I can prove with stuff on earth. So I don't care about what's going on in the celestial beings. I don't care what's going on in about the space and all of these things. He's like, because if it can't be proven with a linear plane using Euclidean geometry, then it's not something of my interest and my knowledge. And as an intelligent man, I'm searching for what I can prove, not for what is. And so he denies God's existence essentially by saying, if God was never meant for us to understand, then I want no part of it because it's my job to try and understand things. And so it was a really interesting argument, which led to his own insanity. But shout out, guys, The Brothers Karamazov is what they call one of the greatest works of fiction of all time. And it's incredible. Could talk about it forever. But when you were saying that about, it got me thinking about him.
Yeah, and that's the book that you're currently reading. And again, it's one of the main reasons that our family is so, what's the word I want to use?
For?
Yeah, I was going to say pumped up. We're just proponents.
Yeah.
How about that? We're proponents of classical education because even when I listen to you talk about the books that you're reading, I'm fascinated with.
You start reading them yourself.
Yeah, I do. Because you're mentioning something, and I'm a history buff, and you're going into detail on one of these topics, and I'm like, I didn't read that in high school.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, give me that book. Where's that book at? Last night I asked you for one. I'm like, where's that book?
Guess what we read today?
What'd you read
We read Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letters from a Birmingham Jail, which is really cool because we're from Birmingham. So my teacher had me come in and speak about what the social climate was in Alabama during that time since I studied Alabama history and all of those things. And he was like, so Eva, you've seen this stuff. You've been to his church. You've been on Rosa Parks' bus, all of these things. He was like, what was that time like? Because you know the history best, out of anybody in this class. And so I got to talk about that for a little bit, about how segregated Alabama was and why MLK ended up in Birmingham in the first place. And it was really cool.
Yeah, and that's when you mentioned that, shout out to the museums
Yep.
that we have both in Montgomery and Birmingham. If you haven't been, they are absolutely phenomenal. When you said Rosa Parks bus, you remember when
Yep.
we did our
Yep.
little field trip
Yep.
and you sat on the bus,
I did.
and that's really it was a very
Really cool moment. It stuck with me. So.
yeah, obviously.
And,
So
yeah.
a core memory.
Yeah. So, but anyway, a lot of these topics come from the books I read. And so last week you had mentioned something about morality. And I said, I think I actually disagree with you on my views of ethics and morality and where it comes from in the regards to human nature. And you were like, what? We're going to talk about that after. And so we did talk about it after. And he's like, Eva, that would make a great podcast episode. And so that's kind of where we're going today in 14 minutes.
Yeah, and I've done, as we kind of continued the conversation, just sitting here at the table after we hit the pause button, I don't think it's that we disagree. It's just that
My approach to it, I think, is different.
I think your approach is different. I think you have a much more of a depth in terms of your education that you're currently in the middle of, in terms of your understanding of morality, reasoning, the Enlightenment period, because you have spent so much time studying it. And you will mention something, and again, as a pastor and as a student of history, I'm like, holy cow, I didn't know that. Let me go look that up. And so, it's funny. We got role reversal. You used to raid my book cabinet. Now I'm raiding your book, your book cabinet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun.
I really love it. It's really good. If you ever want to talk about good classical books, guys, come talk to me. I will love to talk about it. But essentially, the topic I was trying to prove to him last week was that I don't believe human nature is something that like we're born with. It's something that's modeled to us by our parents. So like, yes, God has created us with in his image and with a desire to worship something. But one of my favorite things to say, and I say this in so many papers, and it's also my response to if somebody tells me they're an atheist, I'm like, here's the thing though, is we can't separate reason for why we prove something from faith in the fact that it's correct. And so the question is, what are you putting your faith in? Is it faith in God? Is it faith in man? Is it faith in science, in nature, in yourself, in the way the wind moves, or in a different religion or different things? And it's, what are you putting your faith in? And so that got me questioning a while back, was like, well, what are we born with? What are some of the characteristics we're born with? And and that got me thinking about Robinson Crusoe, like we've talked about many times. Which
I'm reading right now.
Which you are finding so brutal to read. It's all in Old English.
Actually, here's the good news. It's written in Old English, and I was telling you that. I'm like, oh my gosh, stick a fork in my eye. But I finally got to some pages last night where I'm starting to get into it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I see why she liked this, but go ahead.
And so, in Robinson Crusoe, long story short, he gets shipwrecked on an island after like disobeying his parents. His parents were like, don't go sailing, don't do that. He gets shipwrecked on an island for like 20 some years or something. And so he has to learn how to how to live, how to provide for himself, how to cook, how to do all of these things. And at first he tries to do it without God, and he kind of struggles, and eventually he finds God. But one thing on the island is there's cannibals. And from his perspective, as somebody who's grown up in London and all of these things, he's like, oh, that's wrong. They're wrong. They're evil. But for them, it was like a sacrifice. Like, it was like this whole thing was like, it was not this brutal massacre. It was something they did in either honor or respect, or to people who had disrespected them. And to them, that was completely normal. There was no wrongness in the death. There was no wrongness in the action, because it had never been modeled to them to be wrong. And so I believe that human nature is something that's modeled to us, and that as cultures and mindsets and ideologies change and shift, they kind of morph into what becomes our human nature. So when people say things like, well, this is in our human nature, it's been there forever. No, it hasn't. Because I feel like I'm a very strong believer that, for an example, it would be like saying our greed is in our human nature, right? No, it's not. It is now, but it's not something we are born with. It's not something that it is a consequence of sin. But if we all turned away from greed and we lived in a society that did not care about it, it wouldn't be something that would be modeled anymore. We wouldn't understand it, and so we wouldn't know it. Same thing with cannibalism. If we were all cannibals, we would have nothing wrong. We would see nothing wrong with eating of another person, because it was never modeled for us. And so it's why I believe that, like the girl who lived in the woods for so long and never learned English. It was like that story or whatever, how she was there for so long. Like she's never going to understand human culture to an extent because of the fact that she spent so long it being modeled to her in an animalistic way. And I'm like, it's not something we're born with. We're not born. It's something that's modeled. And so we have to be so careful. And I saw this great thing by a content creator yesterday. And it said, a lot of times people want to give me hate. This was like a makeup artist. And she's like for how I do my makeup. And they're like, your kids are going to be so embarrassed of you one day. And she's like, but I'm embarrassed for you because that's not something they're born with. It's something they're taught. And so you spend time commenting on my post telling me that my kids are going to be embarrassed of me one day and that they're going to be bullied. Well, whose parents are going to be of those, like, or those bullies are going to be children of parents who make comments on my Instagram page when my kids are 6 months old about how embarrassed they're going to be. It's a taught experience. It's a taught hate. It's a taught thing. It's not something you're born with. And that really got me thinking about this continued subject we're talking about. And so I think it was just a very interesting word spill right there.
Yeah. And, to kind of go back to last week and kind of link it to today, the real question is, okay, where does morality come from? Where do ethics come from? And there are people that really believe that morality, ethics, it is a learned behavior. And I can agree with that to an extent. It is a learned behavior. It's a human construct. Some cultures are different. Some societies are different. Some norms are different. But even acknowledging that, we still have to go back to the original question. Okay, yes, but where does morality and ethics come from?
Well,
there has to be an origin.
The
So
law.
the origin is where I think, and this is what I love about Christianity. I don't think we engage each other enough in discussion like this and ask questions like this because we're afraid that we may not know the answer or that we may slightly disagree.
Yep.
But I think it's where we continue to learn, where we engage, where we kind of get a better depth in our understanding. And so to go back to origins, for me, one of the big deals, for instance, is, okay, if it's not, some people believe that it's strictly evolutionary, that just like humans are evolutionary, morality and ethics are evolutionary. Well, I get that because if that's your worldview, evolution, you think that that's a naturally occurring thing. But for me, morality in itself is not strictly an evolutionary thing. There had to be an origin where God himself distinguished between, but where he distinguished between commandments in the terms of morality and social norms.
Yep.
Yeah, you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, but as a Christian, then you have to go back, and I'm going to simplify this because they've now determined that there are other legal codes that even predated the Hammurabi Code. But when I came up in school, what they would talk about is the Ten Commandments and the Hammurabi. And your challenge as a Christian is, well, the Hammurabi Code is about 400 years older than the Ten Commandments. Well, as a Christian, you ought to go, well, if that's a legal code and it's older than the Ten Commandments, well, who gave that? Who came up with that?
Yeah.
Did God give that to that culture, or did that culture kind of evolve with a set of societal norms? And if you read, I'm not going to get into all of it. We could do a whole podcast on that. But if you get into the analysis of it, most theologians, most historians will say that the Ten Commandments are distinctly different in the way they're written versus the Hammurabi Code. And so you can't really just make a determination one is this and one is that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so for me as a Christian, it doesn't rattle. What I'm saying is it doesn't rattle me that the Hammurabi Code is roughly 400 to 500 years older than the Ten Commandments. I don't care. It came from societal norms. Legalities were things that people were dealing with even prior to the giving of the Ten Commandments. But Paul himself writes later, man would not understand sin without the law, and that's why God gave it to Abraham. I was
about to quote actually Romans.
Okay, we'll quote it.
It's something I wrote in my brother's Karamazov paper, but it's Romans 5:12 through 14, and I think it actually answers your question, like what we're talking about, really well. It says, therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. So that's 12. So 13 says, to be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not charged against anyone's account who is there when there was no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, and even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, and who is a pattern of the one to come. And I think that's a great example of what we're just talking about, is because it even says, like, there was a time before the law was created. But I still think that as sinners, we knew that, like, death was wrong, right? Because obviously it's going to be passed down through time, the story of Adam.
Wait a minute. What do you mean death is wrong?
Not death is wrong, but it's a consequence. Like I'm saying, like the brutality of it. Like, so if the Hammurabi Code existed, and I've never seen it. I have no idea what this is. Never studied it before.
Y'all never studied the Hammurabi Code? Wow. Okay. See, that's on your list now.
Yep. And so, but I'm assuming that it probably says something about murder, right? Well, that's because there's a brutality to it that isn't nature, like found in nature. Because the difference between like a lion, so we're talking about it being evolutionary, right?
Yeah.
A lion kills for food, not for pleasure.
Right.
But when they're influenced by humans, like the whales at SeaWorld, then they kill for pleasure, essentially, because out of necessity, because they've been influenced by humans. But in the natural working order of the world, a lion kills because they need to eat. And so the same thing can be said with humans and death, is murder is wrong, because it goes against the natural working order of how death is supposed to happen and things, which I'm not saying we're supposed to kill people. I'm saying, like, in the sense of, like, there has always been a working order to something that can be modeled in nature, but there's still a sin in the world. And I think that I definitely think that ethics and morality is more of an evolutionary thing, and that without the law being formed, we would not know right from wrong. But it took the law being formed for us to build these ethics and morals.
Right.
And that if you don't know of it, if you live in a culture that is completely unaware of it, then of course your ethics and morality is going to be completely different, because you've never known the law. You live by your own law. And so I think that's the point I was trying to prove.
Yeah, and I think that's great.
Yep.
I think we're saying the same thing in different ways and different thoughts. And I think to kind of wrap today's episode up, and we're probably going to come back with this at some time. We could. And I think just looking ahead, we are at our 1 year anniversary next week. Yeah, excited about that. We're going to talk about what you've learned, what I've learned. But then going into our second year, I would really like to kind of unpack some of the Enlightenment, the different figures that you have studied, the philosophers, the theologians, because
they all shape up how we think.
They have. And I think sometimes because we do have such a surface education and have gotten away from some of these things.
They've learned where stuff comes from.
Yeah. I just think it'd be fun for us to kind of unpack some of this a little bit more.
But I also, and I want to, honestly, some people may be like, this isn't like bridging the generational gap, but it honestly is, because now we've kind of, me and him, we're so close-minded on things because we talk about so many things that we're now trying to understand previous generations that maybe we were never a part of, and why they think that way, why they acted that way. But also because history repeats itself. And so by learning from the past, we're helping communicate with each other better in the future. And I feel like in America specifically, we're in a state where a lot of people don't understand how to look for what first happened. They just are looking at like the call, like the effect, and they don't look towards the cause. And some of these things we're seeing in America have been brewing and stewing for 100 years, 200 years, but they only look at what's happening now. And you can learn so much by looking back at it. And I feel like that's what you need to do with history. But the point of this episode is I really think we need to challenge each other and ourselves to just think of, like, where do I define right and wrong? If you're not a Christian, what is right and wrong for you? If you are a Christian, what is right and wrong for you and how does that align with the Bible, and just evaluating that, because we shouldn't ever become stagnant in our growth and understanding who we are and why we do things the way we do.
I love that point, because it's like, whatever you believe, you got to answer the question, well, where did I get that from?
And I said this about the election, but I was like, if I said about the election, if you don't vote, don't complain about what's going on because you didn't actively try and make a say in how making it better and to the way you want. And I say the same things about ethics and morality. Don't complain about the culture and the state of the world if you're not actively trying to understand it and improve it yourself. And I think that's exactly what I wanted to get across in this episode is challenge yourself and think about it and ask yourself, what do I believe? Because then when somebody challenges you on it, you're going to be so much stronger in your faith. No matter what you believe in, whether it's the Christian faith or something completely different, you're going to be so much stronger in it because you understand what you believe and it's not something you just blindly live out.
Yep. Totally agree. Yep. So with that, really good episode. As we close out a year, Eva, I am looking so forward because we're not going, you and I, we've told people we don't develop scripts.
Nope.
We're kind of talking about an episode just in general terms, and then we may throw out a few key points that we're going to talk about, but we don't script this at all. And so, just looking forward to next week. We're not even going to share with each other what the lessons learned are. I can't wait to hear what each other's going to have to say about our first year of doing this together.
Excited.
But I have had a blast with you doing this. It has been fun.
It has been.
And we're going to have a blast next week, and then looking forward to our second year. So with that, let's always, regardless of what happens, let's always be able to talk from generation to generation.
Hey, if you enjoyed our episode, make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review because it helps people who don't know about us hear our message. And if you want to follow us on our socials, follow us at G2G_podcast on Instagram and Generation to Generation on Facebook.